Welcome to MojoPlays, and today we're ranking every Pokemon game. In this list, we're going to count down every mainline entry in the core Pokemon series, so we won't be listing the dozens of spin-offs and side games.
Before we begin, we publish new content all week long, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Number 20, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. One criticism that the Pokemon franchise has received over the years has been its desire to return to the past again and again, particularly with the Kanto region. Let's Go marked the second time that Gen 1 had been remade, this time drawing primarily from Yellow version. The games also sought to draw in a younger audience while cashing in on the success of the Pokemon Go mobile game. The decision to appeal to a more casual crowd left some feeling let down. Despite the nostalgic appeal of the games, many longtime fans were turned off by the flat difficulty curve and the game's motion controls. Number 19, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. After a run of highly successful remakes that both old and new fans swooned over, hype had built for years for a return to the Sinnoh region. However, that hype quickly dissipated when details emerged about the games and their chibi graphical style. That criticism only intensified upon release, dividing many critics and fans. But it was unfortunately not the only issue. Being the first core games in the series not to be directly developed by Game Freak, it was clear something was missing. Common criticism also included the lack of popular features implemented in Platinum, and unlike past remakes, a failure to innovate. Number 18, Pokemon Sun and Moon. Entering its third decade, the Pokemon franchise had begun to grow a bit stale, so it was overdue for the formula to be shaken up somewhat. Sun and Moon did just that, replacing gym battles with island challenges. While this was a positive step in theory, the execution left something to be desired. The fact that there was little for players to engage with outside of the plot, which was notoriously slow for the first few islands, drew criticism, as did the generational gimmick Z-Moves. While the introduction of regional variants was praised, the decision to feature exclusively on Gen 1 Pokemon was unfortunate. Enhanced Ultra versions of the games would add to the plot and implement fun features, but were largely the same games as before. Number 17, Pokemon Yellow version Special Pikachu Edition. Pokemon had become a global phenomenon in the late 90s, with video games, cards, and particularly the anime creeping into almost every aspect of pop culture. So naturally, many of the fans won by the anime sought to play the games on which it was based, but were confused by the vast differences in the stories. To appease these fans, a new version of Pokemon Red and Blue was created that partially mirrored the plot of the TV show. Those changes included receiving Pikachu as a starter and introducing characters original to the show. While some of the features in the game, such as a walking Pokemon, have returned in later entries, the game was seen as a diversion, released in Japan just months before the next generation of games. Number 16, Pokemon Sword and Shield. After existing on exclusively handheld devices for its entire history, there were bound to be some changes when the core Pokemon games moved to the hybrid console, the Nintendo Switch. One of the most notable ways it did this was by introducing a long-awaited open-world element in the games named the Wild Area. However, there were drawbacks as well, with the so-called Dexit being one of the most notorious moments in the fandom. Due in part to the sheer number of Pokemon in existence, for the first time, a number of them were unavailable by any means in the game, which drew the ire of many fans. Other complaints included the linear path of the region, the graphics, and the overall story. Number 15, Pokemon X and Y. Transitioning from the charming sprites the Pokemon had used from the beginning to fully 3D models was a bit of a mixed bag. While it was impressive to finally see these beloved creatures fully realized, not all of them translated perfectly to the new dimension, and battle animations could be awkward at times. However, there was a lot more to love than to complain about with X and Y. Pokemon began their streak of generational gimmicks with one that is still a favorite, Mega Evolutions. While Mega Evolution hasn't stuck around consistently, other beloved additions such as more player customization and the fairy type are enduring parts of the franchise. Number 14, Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. The other half of Generation 6, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, brought all of the improvements from X and Y to the fan-favorite region of Hoenn. The games kept much of what made the original such a great experience while also adding in several elements from Emerald, although some were upset about the lack of the Battle Frontier. It also expanded on those games though, with the much-beloved epilogue titled the Delta Episode. Other elements carried over from the originals though, like HMs and the abundant sea routes, drew the same ire as before. Too much water apparently. Number 13, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. By the time the 4th generation of Pokemon arrived, the formula had become well established, and this pairing of games did little to shake that up, providing a familiar yet fun experience. However, on a technical level, the games advanced by leaps and bounds. The jump in hardware from the Game Boy Advance to the Nintendo DS was fully taken advantage of by Game Freak, who implemented the second screen to great effect. Perhaps more importantly, however, was the addition of Wi-Fi. This meant that you no longer needed to have a friend with a link cable and a copy of the opposite version to complete your Pokédex. Thanks to the GTS, you could trade with strangers on the other side of the world. Number 12, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. Starting a long-standing tradition, Fire Red and Leaf Green were the first remakes in the franchise. The games took the familiar and beloved original entries and updated them for the GBA. The beloved story was given pristine graphics and an abundance of quality of life improvements that would have been impossible in the past. For the first time, Kanto was explorable as a lush, colorful world, with both the overworld and trainer battles looking better than ever. The expanded plot involving the Sevi Islands connected it to the generation's other games, Ruby and Sapphire, meaning the player had access to over 350 Pokemon. Number 11, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. While the first two entries were set in the connected regions of Kanto and Johto, Ruby and Sapphire were set in the totally new island of Hoenn. This meant that along with the additional 135 Pokemon introduced, an entirely new league, routes, and even weather made their debut. More than just the amount of Pokemon possible, and graphics improved however, as many elements core to the Pokemon experience first appeared. These included natures and abilities for Pokemon, as well as double battles. The plot, different for each version, was also vastly expanded and involved saving the world from a villainous team and incorporating the legendaries into the story rather than having them as unconnected optional catches. Number 10, Pokémon Crystal. Unlike the previous third version, which was aimed squarely at more casual fans, Crystal version added a number of elements designed to appeal to the more hardcore fans of the series. This included the Battle Tower, offering a challenge for more seasoned players. Graphical and quality of life improvements meant that for the first time, a Pokémon game wasn't playable on the original Game Boy. Another first was very basic player customization. For the first time, players could choose to play as a boy or a girl. The game laid a blueprint for creating a successful and worthwhile third version that generations after would emulate. Number 9, Pokémon Platinum. Whether this was your first time in the Sinnoh region or you'd already beaten Diamond or Pearl, Platinum offered a rewarding experience. This was because while retaining the core of what made those games great, it also expanded on the adventure. The most notable way it did this was with Giratina and the Distortion World, which enhanced the story and provided a new element of gameplay. It also greatly expanded the Pokémon available in the game, giving players more options for team building, particularly with fire types, which had been almost non-existent before. However, this also meant gym leaders and the Elite Four had access to more Pokémon, giving them more cohesive and type-appropriate teams. Number 8, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. After flirting with an open world in the entries leading up to them, finally, in Scarlet and Violet, Pokémon would finally receive a fully open world with the Paldea region. However, much like the first generation, these games were plagued by bugs and technical issues. Those are primarily a result of the freedom afforded to the player for the first time, letting them explore the region in any order they choose, following 3 main storylines, or just exploring and trading to their heart's content. Those 3 disparate stories eventually crossed over in a grand finale where the player and the various friends they had made along the way teamed up. The end result was one of the best and most emotionally resonant finales in Pokémon history. Number 7, Pokémon HeartGold and SoulSilver. The, no pun intended, gold standard of video game remakes, HeartGold and SoulSilver drew not just from what made Gold and Silver so special, but from all the best aspects of the entire franchise to that point. This, of course, included elements and story beats that carried over from Crystal, but it also tied up plots introduced in Fire Red and Leaf Green. Walkable Pokémon, the ability to rebattle gym leaders with improved teams, and many more elements. The games became some of the best-selling ever on the Nintendo DS, and now hold almost as much nostalgia for gamers as the games they remade. Number 6, Pokémon Emerald. Simply put, Emerald took what made Ruby and Sapphire great and perfected them. While in those games, either Team Aqua or Magma were villains, with the other team being allies, the third version made both teams into antagonists. This made their ultimate clash and attempt to control the forces of nature and the Pokémon that controlled those all the more intense. This leads to an encounter with the legendary Rayquaza, which serves as a fitting conclusion to the story. However, that doesn't mean you have to stop playing, as there was plenty of added content following the story's conclusion and the defeat of the Elite Four. In particular, the Battle Frontier set the standard for Pokémon post-game content. Number 5, Pokémon Legends Arceus. As we've seen, Pokemon has made a few attempts at retooling its familiar formula, but none were as radical or as successful as in Legends Arceus. The game shifts from focusing on a trainer making his way through the Pokemon League to one where they must navigate an ancient and often harsh wilderness. Set in Sinnoh's past, known as Hisu, players for the first time could be attacked directly by wild Pokemon, and featured new catching and battling mechanics. This somewhat increased difficulty, along with more mature themes and its art style, made it appeal less to casual fans and more to gamers that had been with the franchise for years or even decades. Number 4, Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. Game Freak surprised everyone when, rather than releasing a third version of the same game, they instead created direct sequels for the 5th generation. Players were treated to a proper sequel set 2 years after Black and White. The game expands upon themes introduced in the first games, once again featuring a complex plot with complicated morality. New areas of the map were opened while other areas were changed forever, as are many returning characters. They also feature one of the coolest features in any Pokemon game, the World Tournament. Gym leaders and champions from every entry in the series could be battled in a single elimination style tournament. Number 3, Pokemon Red and Blue versions. Nothing on this list would have been possible without the original. Despite the many remakes and updates on far more capable hardware, these versions remain some of the most replayable in the entire series. The charm of the simple graphics and sprites were practically undeniable, and even the glitches were fun rather than game-breaking. The basic formula that nearly every subsequent Pokemon game used was near perfect from the start. Defeating the Pokemon League, besting the surprise champion, your longtime rival, all while toppling an evil organization made the game legendary. As did the quest to catch them all, something you could only do with the help of some real-world friends, making the games an engaging social experience in the real world and helping to ignite the worldwide craze. Number 2, Pokemon Black and White. The 5th generation of Pokemon was notable for taking some big chances and making a few massive departures from the series. The most obvious ways this was done were the region and the Pokemon themselves. The first game not to be based on a region of Japan, the Unova region drew inspiration from the New York metropolitan era. It also featured an entirely new selection of Pokemon, which made the games feel fresh, introducing the most new Mon of any generation. The exceptional story is remembered for its complex themes and thrilling finale. It asked moral questions frequently through the player's enigmatic rival, N. Number 1, Pokemon Gold and Silver. The second pairing of Pokemon versions took the brilliant concept laid out in the original games and perfected it. Everything from held items to breeding to shiny forms and even an internal clock debut in Gold and Silver. Meanwhile, broken mechanics and balancing issues were fixed with the introduction of Steel and Dark types. The sequels brought players into a new region with new Pokemon for the first time, as they battled through Johto and featured a truly powerful redemption arc for the game's rival. Players that defeated the Elite Four had a special prize, returning to Kanto, giving players a chance to explore a familiar landscape somewhat changed from the original. Here you would clash with, who else, but the player from the first game in a spectacular showdown. Which game was your favorite to catch 'em all in? Let us know in the comments.